So let's keep going on digestive system, part 2 of the lecture video. We are going through in the stomach the gastric glands and what those cells secrete. We were talking about how pepsin digests proteins. So protein breakdown is going on in the stomach. You can absorb alcohol in your stomach lining, but for the most part we're not doing a lot of absorption here. Really important thing that we make here is intrinsic factor. So intrinsic factor we need for the absorption of vitamin B12 from the intestine, and we need vitamin B12 to finish red blood cell development. So if you don't have intrinsic factor right away, it's okay. You save up about 3 years worth of B12. But after that, you won't be able to make new red blood cells and you'll be anemic. It's called pernicious anemia. You're also going to be secreting gastrin here, the hormone that tells the other cells to secrete. So as our stomach gets less acidic when food comes in and stretches, we're going to release gastrin. It's going to tell the other cells to secrete. A few imbalances. Stomach ulcers, so that's holes in the stomach lining, most often related to Helicobacter pylori. It's a bacteria living there that is opportunistic. So if you get stressed out and your immune system is lowered in response, Helicobacter pylori can go into those stomach lining and burrow through. It can be bleeding. And then gastritis, inflammation. This is acute inflammation. You can also have chronic. And long term, you're really worried about that intrinsic factor for your red blood cells. Great. So we finished the stomach. Why does it do this? I'm fine. Now let's go to the small intestine. The small intestine has 3 parts. Right after the stomach, we've got the pyloric sphincter, and that leads to the duodenum or duodenum. First 8-10 inches, this is where almost everything happens in the small intestine. Because you'll have the pancreas sending its juices in, you'll have the liver and the gallbladder sending their secretions in. We're going to do lots of absorption, lots of digestion. And then you've got the jejunum and then the ileum. Notice it's spelled differently than the bone, the hip bone ileum. Important note there. And that's going to meet up with the large intestine. So we've got huge amounts of digestion going on here. All 4 of those organic molecule types are going to be broken down. You'll have some enzymes coming from the lining of the small intestine, but the pancreas is going to be really big for this. So absorption, this is where almost all of our absorption occurs. So we want to make sure that we get all of those nutrients out of our food and that they don't just go along. So we have to increase the surface area, the amount of space in which we can do absorption. We actually have 3 modifications to increase surface area. So instead of being smooth, you've got these circular folds, so the whole way down the lining folds, and then each of those folds is lined with villi all over, and then on those villi, you've got microvilli on each of the cells. So here we can see that microvilli, these little hair-like structures, kind of like cilia, but for surface area, with all of the receptors for sugars, fats, etc. So, huge amounts of surface area. We don't want anything we've eaten to not get absorbed. Fun fact, there are some species that are hindgut fermenters, like rabbits. So rabbits will break down most of their nutrients after they've finished absorbing, well, some of them. And so some of their poop is this specialized nutrient-rich poop, and so they have to eat their poop to get those nutrients. Be happy that you are not a hindgut fermenter, and instead you're able to absorb all of these in the small intestine. So now let's look at the pancreas. Pancreas, digestion. as far as being part of the digestive system. There's two types of cells here. There's cells that make these enzymes. The other cells there make hormones, glucagon, and insulin for blood sugar regulation. But that's endocrine. So digestive system functions making these enzymes. And you can see in this picture how the pancreas kind of looks like a tadpole. It's got a tail, and then it's going to meet up with the liver and gallbladder tube. So the pancreatic duct is then going to go into the small intestine, and all of those enzymes are going to be released here. Next, we have the liver, largest internal organ. The liver is great. It is highly regenerative, so you can give someone part of your liver, and if you get rid of 3/4, within a year, you've replaced pretty much your whole liver. So it's very resilient. However, we'll see later, long-term damage, not ideal. So the liver has several functions. Big ones, it processes nutrients. So all of our intestinal veins, instead of going right back to the inferior vena cava into the right atrium, they make a pit stop on their way to the liver through the hepatic portal vein. And so this nutrient-rich blood is going to go in, and then our cells there, called hepatocytes, are going to process those nutrients. They're going to store some. They'll help with proteins and transport, but it's very cool. It's also going to help us recycle the parts of bile, because it's going to release bile, and then it gets back through. So this is a view of what part of the liver looks like. The blood vessels here are sinusoid. The capillaries, they're basically open. And all of these pink parts are the hepatocytes. Hepa has to do with liver. Hepatocytes. Liver cells. We've got a lot going on here. So we've got blood vessels. We've got two types of blood vessels. We've got branches off of the aorta that go through the hepatic artery and in with oxygen for the cells. And then you've got those hepatic portal veins coming in. The other type of vessels we have going through here are bile ducts. So these hepatocytes make bile and send them into these little canals, these little canaliculi that go to the bile duct. And bile is a fat emulsifier. So fats are hydrophobic. They don't want to dissolve in water, right? So what they do is they clump together in these large fat droplets. It's really hard to get enzymes in there to break those bonds then. So what bile does is it acts as a detergent, and it comes in. I should use green because bile is green, and it breaks up those fat droplets into smaller pieces so that now it's easier for enzymes to get in. Does that make sense? Hope so, because you can't answer me. Our liver helps regulate blood glucose levels, so it'll store glucose as glycogen, and then when our blood sugar gets low, we release insulin, break apart that, release it in the blood flow, bring our blood sugar levels back up. And they also remove poisonous substances. These hepatocytes have a lot of smooth endoplasmic reticulum to help us detoxify. They're also going to help those hydrophobic molecules that we need to send through our blood by giving them protein transporters. Disorders of the liver, cirrhosis, so caused by excessive alcoholism. We have a ton of scar tissue. Our liver cannot regenerate from that. And then hepatitis, inflammation of the liver, different types, ABC, based on different viral causes. Mushroom poisoning can also cause it. Obvious signs here. So bilirubin is a breakdown component. Is made when we break down red blood cells, and normally our liver breaks it down. It breaks it down into stereocobacillin, which is brown and part of our feces, breaks it down into urocobacillin, which is yellow. Bilirubin is yellow. Oh, perfect that I'm using yellow. And if we don't break it down, that'll build up and you'll have jaundice. So in babies that are born prematurely, they can't break down bilirubin well yet, and they will be jaundice. You can't talk liver without talking about the gallbladder. So the gallbladder is basically on the inferior side of the liver, and it's the small muscular sac. And you put bile in there to store it. And as you store it there, water gets reabsorbed, so the bile gets more concentrated. And when food starts to go from the stomach into the small intestine, hormones are going to be released that tell the gallbladder to contract and send that bile down into the small intestine and help emulsify fats. Now, if you have things built up in there like cholesterol will build up, you'll have gallstones. And sometimes those can pass on their own. Other times you can remove the whole gallbladder. You're still making bile in the liver and sending it in, so you can still digest some fats, but if you eat a really greasy meal, have a lot of fat at once, it'll cause pain, cramping, discomfort because you're not able to break down the fats well enough. So here's a lovely summary of the digestive system's accessory structures and what they make. And you'll notice the pancreas, liver, gallbladder all feed into the small intestine. And that summarizes their secretions. Once we've absorbed almost all of our nutrients, we're going to move on to the large intestine. So there we absorb some water and some vitamins made by the gut microbes in our large intestine. So our large intestine has several parts. The ileocecal valve is where you go from small intestine's ileum to the cecum of the large intestine. Hanging off of there is your appendix, or your variform appendix, like the size of your pinky. Considered part of the lymphatic system because it has lymphatic tissue, which makes sense because this is filled with bacteria. If you remove your appendix, you're okay. You might just have a little bit harder time dealing with these microbes if they try to escape. And we name the parts of the large intestine, or colon, based on what food is doing. So ascending goes up, then we have a colic flexure, transverse goes across, descending, sigmoid colon, rectum, anal canal with our anal rectal flaps, and our orifices. Hopefully you don't have to. The gut microbes are maybe my favorite thing to talk about because they're really interesting. We don't know how much they do yet, and we're slowly learning more and more about them. So you've got lots of different types of bacteria, and we've learned a bit about those, but you also have fungus, and we're just starting to learn about those and how they can affect other organ systems, particularly your nervous system. So they release neurotransmitters too. And they found in studies where altering the gut microbes can change your nervous system chemistry, your brain chemistry. For example, they did a study on depression and bipolar manic depressive, and what they found was in 20% of the cases, if they changed their diet to include more healthy gut microbe foods, it's the things you think are healthy, fruits and vegetables. In 20% of those cases, it alleviated their symptoms of bipolar and depression. Pretty interesting. We've also found it's really important for our immune system and correlated with different autoimmune diseases. For example, Crohn's disease, which is part of the small intestine, large intestine, body attacking itself. They found particular bacteria that are always present and fungus that's always present when you have those. So we're just learning about how they affect things. And we'll talk more in the next video.